Chapter 11. He'd been dreaming about him and Silas, perched in high branches. Then it was him and Wallace. When he opened his eyes, the world was too vivid, and he shut them again and dreamed of wearing his monster mask, pulling at screaming girls in his barn. Later he saw the high television, first thinking he'd fallen asleep in his mother's bed at River Acres. Had she died? He closed his eyes again and opened them in darkness. Silas had floated into the room and was telling him something. Not to confess. Here? He didn't know what was a dream and what wasn't. When he woke next, he seemed in a hospital now, the bed next to him empty, not even sheets. It hurt to turn his head. He felt confined, his throat so dry he couldn't speak. The window so bright he couldn't look outside. His chest ached. That seemed real. His nose hurt. His mouth felt tight. His moving toes seemed real. His curling fingers. He closed his eyes, dreamed of an ambulance, hearing its siren, belted on a flatbed. The black girl, monkey lips, over him yelling, "Stay with us, Larry! Stay with us!" Overhead the high television again. The window. Fluorescent lights. Hospital. It hurt to breathe, but he was breathing faster. He felt tears tracking down the side of his face. He woke again. He moved and a wave of dizziness flooded his head. He heard an announcement asking for Dr. Somebody to call extension 202. He lowered his chin and saw his bandaged chest and the tubes going into his arms. Something stuck up his nose. Something hooked in his lip. He'd never been so thirsty and thought he might gag. He thought, how, when Johnny Smith from the dead zone opened his eyes from his coma, the nurse wasn't surprised, and Johnny thought he must have had his eyes open before. He faded back to sleep. When he opened his eyes again, a nurse saw him watching her and jumped. "Oh!" she said. Then a man in a blue uniform was standing at the door, talking on a radio. A moment later a doctor came in, snapping on latex gloves, and asked him his name, and he tried to say it, the doctor working on the tube in his mouth. "Get him some water," the doctor told somebody, and a moment later a straw touched his lips. "Sip it slowly," the doctor said. A suit with a stethoscope around his neck, short gray hair, glasses hanging on a string, shining a light in his eyes, taking his pulse. "How do you feel?" "Bad," he wanted to say. "What's your name?" "Larry," he rasped. "Ott." "Good. How old are you?" 41. "Who's the president?" Larry coughed. "Did they find that girl?" The doctor looked behind him, cop in the door. "Yes," he said. He was feeling better. A little. The tubes in his mouth and nose were gone, but his face felt hot and chapped from the tape. More sleep. Dreams. Waking to find 3 men watching him. The doctor, leaning against the wall. Roy French in a camouflage t-shirt, holding a paper, a cigarette behind his ear, and another, older, balding man he didn't recognize. The men made the room smaller, plus the nurse now coming in, hair tied back, gloves, scrubs. She pressed a button, raising Larry's bed, so he's in more of a sitting position. She held a straw to his lips and he sipped. "Now y'all don't take too long," the doctor said. "He's still weak." To Larry he said, "It's amazing you're still with us. I can tell you that. If Officer Jones hadn't sent an ambulance, if the EMTs had gotten there half an hour later, if they hadn't done everything exactly right." He shrugged. "And our ER man, Dr. Israel, just a genius." "He was in Baghdad," French said. 2 tours over there." "You'd been shot near the heart," the doctor said. "Had a very leaky hole, bleeding like stink." "Officer Jones?" Larry whispered. 32 Jones, French said. "He saved your life, Larry." Silence. "Least you got the place to yourself," French said, tapping the other bed. I was in here last year for gallstones, and they bunked me with this old geezer, kept farting. He was deaf as a post and couldn't tell how loud they were. Wasn't that me? The other man said. He was white, stocky, a tight belly in his button-down shirt and a string tie, short hair, pistol high on his belt, star pinned to his chest. There was a gentleman in here when they first brought him in, the nurse said, but he asked to be moved. That's enough, the doctor said. If you need me, she said, I'll call. She walked out of the room, leaving the door cracked. French went and closed it, nodding to the deputy outside, and came back and stood looking down. You know me, he said to Larry, but you might not know this fella here, Sheriff Jack Lawley. Morning, he said, nodding to Larry. French set the envelope and a tape recorder on the empty bed. We got to talk, he said. Larry adjusted his left arm, stiff and sore, and felt something holding his wrist. He tried to look, but couldn't see what it was. His right wrist, too. Then he knew. French picked up the recorder and clicked a button and set it down. If you don't mind, I'm going to record this conversation. You get to be as old as me and Sheriff here. You forget things. That okay with you? Yes, sir. Larry's voice hoarse. Now, if you need a break, just say so. We got plenty of time. Doc here tells me you're going to pull through. Said the bullet just missed your heart. Hit a rib and bounced around your gut a while. Had yourself a heart attack and then your organ shut down and they took your spleen. But here you are. Miracle, the sheriff said. Did you shoot yourself? He couldn't remember. He thought of Wallace giving him the gun. He wanted to ask why he was manacled to the bed. He tried to think and knew things were there to be remembered, but where? What were they? His mother staring off, but not at anything he could see. Was that what she was looking for? All those missing things? I don't know, he said. Well, French said, glancing at Lolly, let's come back to that in a minute. Now, Doc here says the first thing you asked when you come to this morning was if we'd found Tina Rutherford. He didn't remember that. Then he did. He remembered his old zombie mask, his father looking at it, shaking his head, his mother saying, Oh, my Lord, Larry. Some memory loss is common, Mr. Ott, the doctor said. Delirium. Just relax. Take your time. Can you tell me, French asked, when was the last time you seen her? Larry moved his eyes. Even that hurt, from French to the sheriff, to the doctor. Is she okay? No, Larry. She ain't. She was found buried in that hunting cabin over on the west end of your land. 9 days in the ground by our estimation. Raped. What? Larry said, coming off the bed, held back by the restraints on his wrists. Beaten. No! Strangled. Larry shaking his head despite the hurt, moving his arms, pulling at the leather belts, the sheet over his feet kicking up. Stay calm, Mr. Ott. The doctor there, frowning. I told y'all it's too soon. Larry had begun to convulse, and the men blurred as they tried to hold him down. Nurse! The doctor called, then, to French, Y'all have to go. His voice spiraling away, and Larry falling back into his own face. The ceiling receding, bright, then distorted, then... When he woke, he lay alone in his bandages and restraints. He thought of his mother and her ladies. Were they unfed? Dead in their pen? A nurse came in, and he said in his cracked voice, Will you help me, please? Not looking at him. What you need? Somebody, he said, to please feed my chickens. They were back next time he woke, French and Lolly, watching him. We've sedated you, Dr. Milton said. If you want to do this later, I'll send these gentlemen off. It's up to you. He shook his head. Thought it was later the same day, the men in the same clothes. You want them to stay? A weak nod. French came to his side. Doctor, not looking at him, can you give us a minute? Well, appreciate it. The doctor rose off the wall where he'd been leaning and opened the door. "I'll be right out here." French clicked his recorder on again and cleared his throat, said who was present and the date, time, and place. "How you feeling, Larry?" He gave a weak shrug. "We'll try not to take too long. Put you out too much. The nurse in yonder said you asked about your chickens. Well, I can tell you they're all fine. There's your old schoolmate, 32, he's been seeing to her. He went out to see your mama, too. She's about the same." "Why?" Larry asked. "Would he do all that?" "Well, I don't try to understand people's motives until after they commit a crime." He smiled and half-turned. "Now, Sheriff Lally here, he was a deputy way back when that other girl, the Walker girl, disappeared." French stepped aside, and the sheriff came and sat on the bed opposite Larry. "First thing," he said, "I'm sorry about the restraints." He unfastened the left one, then leaned over Larry to undo the other. "That was the hospital's request," he said as Larry brought his heavy arms up to his chest and rubbed one wrist, then the other, both sweaty from the lamb's wool lining. "Not something we normally do," the sheriff said, "especially for a man's been shot in the chest and had a heart attack in the same day. I expect you're too weak to pull them IVs out, much less get up and escape." Larry nodded, still massaging his wrists. "Anyway, Chief Inspector French yonder, he told you I was a deputy sheriff back in 1982 when Cindy Walker disappeared. Been on the force about 2 years at that time. Out riding around, serving warrants and picking up drunk drivers, things like that. Rookie stuff. But I remember those events real good, Larry. 'Cause it was the biggest thing to come along in my career at the time. Reason we never arrested you back then, 'cause we never did find a body. And you never confessed. Without no body or confession, there wasn't any way to prove you killed her. Just what we call circumstantial evidence. You had, if memory serves, about 3.5 hours when you was unaccounted for, which would have given you plenty of time to have took her somewhere else. But your story was, you let her off and left her and went to the drive-in, was supposed to pick her up at a road. Only she never showed up. Just poof, gone." Larry opened his lips. "You want to say something?" "Can I talk?" He swallowed. "To Silas." "Who?" The sheriff looked back. French said, "He means 32. The chief came forward. "He's not part of this investigation, Larry. This is what we call out of his jurisdiction. Why you want to talk to him?" "'Cause we used to be friends." French nodded. "He mentioned something about that, but didn't sound like y'all was friends. More like you just went to the same school." "We were friends," Larry said. "Okay. We all remember things different, I guess." He stepped past the sheriff, who eased back and lowered himself into the chair by the window. French glanced at his tape recorder. "Now, I've rode you pretty hard over the years, Larry, I know, but we ain't never found nothing to let us convict you for that Walker girl or any other girls. Till now." He was shaking his head. "I reckon it ain't but a handful of people in the world knew about that cabin out in your woods." "I'd clear forgot it," said the sheriff. "Cabin out in the last part of them woods you ain't been willing to sell, and then one of our men stumbles onto her, out there where, odds are, she ought to never been found. It gets me to thinking, Larry," Prince scratching his head as he talked, "I'm thinking, fella with your history might have just got fed up with the world. World's an awful small place, especially here in southeast Mississippi. Maybe you just got tired of everybody thinking what they've been thinking about you. Hell, maybe we all partly to blame. Whole county ostracizing you. Maybe you just wanted some company. She might have seemed like she come on to you, where these young girls dress, belly-button rings, all that. Tattoos. You, with your own kind of, well, local celebrity, I guess. Maybe she was messing with you, all I know. Your biggest fan. There she is. You see at one place or another, the dairy bar, post office, Walmart, young girl, pretty, long hair, and maybe you resist a while, maybe a long while. But then a man can only resist so long, right? Once his rut gets up, and maybe you drank a parcel of them Pabst Blue Ribbons we seen in your fridge, or smoked a little dope, got out of your head, and next thing you know, you've taken her. Just to talk, for all I know. Little companionship. Man gets lonely. But then, you know, where girls can get all hysterical, maybe you got scared. Maybe she hit you, threatened you, tries to run, and you didn't mean for things to happen like they did. Maybe it was all an accident, her winding up dead. You might not even remember exactly what happened or how it happened. This one fella I knew started drinking with his Air Force buddy, and when he woke up in the morning, it was a butcher knife sticking out of his buddy's chest. Maybe that's why you shot yourself, Larry. All that guilt adding up. Nothing you meant to do, but suddenly it done got out of your hands. And you can bury the past, but it always seems to come back one way or another. There's her face on the news, in the paper. Whole damn world out looking for her, and you alone know the truth. French talking on in his calm voice, making rape, murder logical. Larry listening with his veins full of airy drugs and his head afloat. How reasonable if he had done it. Strangled the girl and buried her. How these men understood his life so thoroughly and knew how people were in the world, in their hearts, brains, what they were capable of doing when they drank a passel of Pabst Blue Ribbon beers and smoked a heap of dope. How you could stick your best buddy with a knife. How sometimes women wanted to be raped. They were asking for it. You put on the mask so it wasn't you doing it. It was somebody else doing what the women wanted anyway. French was saying that. Maybe she was asking for it, and he was trying, as French talked, to see into that space where his mother looked, where the truth of memory hid. He could feel the truth waiting for him, floating like a ghost in the room, but his brain, the doctor said, had been deprived of blood, so there might be lapses or delirium, and he remembered the mask, and remembered the gun. He seemed himself the man in the mask waiting by his door for the other him to come home, watching as Larry got out of his truck and crossed the yard and came up the steps and over the porch and let himself in with his keys, and then coming in the house and turning, Mask Larry, marching up to face Larry, pushing the gun against his heart, and the two Larrys merging to one with one heart, and it's him holding the gun to his own chest, thinking how good it would feel to confess, to please these reasonable men doing their reasonable, necessary work. Larry. He blinked French into focus. Do you think I did it? French glanced back at the sheriff. Yeah. I do, Larry. I think you done away with both girls, Tina Rutherford and Cindy Walker. The sheriff here, he does too. We don't know why you did it, but if you want to tell me, it sure help us. I don't know why, he said. Why I would have done that. I didn't even know that Rutherford girl. I don't know anybody except my mama, and she don't know me. I used to go a week sometimes without talking to anybody except the girls in Kentucky Fried Chicken. Well, French said, sometimes we do bad things without knowing the reasons. That's surely possible. Like I said, things can get out of hand so quick it's like the world's in fast forward. But the way you feeling now, Larry, and how you felt when you put that gun to your chest and pulled the trigger, that ain't going away. It's only going to get worse. I've been in law enforcement a long stretch now, and the one thing I can tell you for sure is that the only way you'll ever feel better about this is to own up and pay the price. Okay, Larry said. Chapter 12. Silas, full of dread, switching his hat one hand to the other, waiting for the hospital elevator, its third-floor light lit so long he imagined somebody must be holding the door. He knew what was going on up there now. Lolly and French coercing Larry, wheedling him, crafting a confession. French so damn smooth at what he called interviewing that people said he could make a stump confess to saying timber. Finally, the elevator door slid open, and Silas stepped in. Pressed 3, and the doors closed. On the third floor, he excused himself between a pair of nurses holding cigarettes and lighters and hurried down the hall, Skip rising with his newspaper to meet him. A doctor talking on his cell phone, finger in his other ear. "Hey, 32, Skip said. "Skip," nodding at the door. "They in there?" "Yep, about 20 minutes this time." The doctor snapped his phone shut. "Can I help you? I'm Dan Milton, Mr. Aunt's physician." Silas offered his hand. 32 Jones. They shook. "The officer who found the Rutherford girl?" Nodding, looking from Skip to Milton. "Can I go in?" Before either could answer, he'd entered the room, Skip and the doctor saying "Wait" together, following him in. French turned and Lolly rose from his chair, his hand on his pistol. "Speak of the devil," French said. He pointed to the door, and Skip nodded and left, but the doctor stayed. Larry raised his head, and when he saw Silas, smiled, his eyes misted with drugs, but he still moved his hand up to his lips, covering his mouth like he did when he was a kid, his wrist red from the restraints. "Hey, Silas. There you are." "Hey, Larry. Here I am." He wondered should he offer to shake his hand. "How you feeling?" "Not too good. They say I shot myself and killed that girl, but I can't remember doing either. And now they want me to say I killed Cindy Walker, too." "You had enough, Mr. Aunt," Dr. Milton said. "You want me to ask these gentlemen to come back tomorrow?" Larry said, "No, sir. I'm glad Silas is here." "Press your buzzer," Milton said, "if you need me." He glanced at French, then the sheriff, and left the room. "Chief," Silas said, "can we have a moment or two, me and Larry?" "Not right yet," French said, "but you can stay and witness our interview." "Interview? Did you come in my room at night?" Larry asked Silas. "Yeah." Silas willing him to shut up, not say more, wait till they could be alone. He focused on the bed rail, long stainless steel, one of the restraints looped on it halfway up. He felt like a kid caught in a lie. "Sometimes." "You was feeding my mama's chickens, too." "Yeah. I never did move the pen the way you do." "Did you bring me night shift?" The man followed his eyes to the book on the table between the beds, the gauze-wrapped hand on the cover, the eyes in its palm gazing out, seeing all. "Yeah," Silas said. "Thanks." "You're welcome." "Did you ever read it?" "Yeah." "You like it?" "No," he said. "Horror, it ain't my thing. Too much of that in real life." He wanted to say how Larry's versions, way back when, were better, but French cleared his throat. "If we can end our Oprah book club, we was just telling Larry here that his guilt won't go away till he owns up to what he's done. Ain't you found that to be the case, 32? "Only if he's done something." Silas sensed French stiffen, heard Lolly squeak in his chair. "Tell him, Silas," Larry said, "that we used to be friends." "Yeah," French said. "Tell us, Silas." "We was," he told Larry. "Friends, huh?" French kept his eyes on Silas. "Y'all meet at school?" "No." Larry seemed stronger now, buoyed, a splotch of color coming into his cheeks. He shifted in his sheets, flexing his hands. "We couldn't be friends there 'cause Silas was black. We used to play out in the woods. Remember, Silas?" "This might," French said, "be a good time to get back on track. You want to tell us what really happened to Cindy Walker, Larry?" "Wait," Silas said. The sheriff coughed behind them, and French fixed him with a hard gaze, one that said, "Don't fuck up." "I took her to where she asked me to," Larry said, oblivious, it seemed, to the tension mounting in the room, "and I let her out. Then I drove off." "That's what you've been saying all these years," French said. "Tell us the rest." "It's time, Larry. Like I said, it ain't going away, this guilt." "It wasn't him," Silas said. "Constable Jones," the sheriff now. "You want to wait in the hall?" "No, I don't." The room quiet except for the tick and beeping of Larry's machines. Silas aware of the chief's hot eyes on his face and the sheriff's on his back like the red dots of laser sights. "Is there something you want to say, then?" French asked. Here it all came. A quarter of a century bunching up on him, bearing down, a truck slamming on its brakes and its logs sliding forward, over the cab, through the window, the back of his head, shooting past him in the road. "It was me," he said, turning away from French. "You?" "I'm the one picked up after Larry dropped her off. In the woods. I'm the one let her off at our road." Larry said, "What?" French clamped his fingers on Silas's shoulder and turned him so he could see his face. "Wait," he said. "It was you that Larry took her to see in 1982? "Yes, it was him." "You mean," French said, "he's been telling the truth all this time, and that you, in fact, were the last person to see her alive?" Silas nodding. "It was you?" Larry asked. "Yeah." "She was pregnant," Larry asked, "with your little baby?" Silas had taken hold of the bed rail. "Is that why you left?" Larry staring at him. "Went to Oxford?" "Part of why." "To meet her?" Silas said, "Larry." "Was it a boy or girl?" "What?" "The baby. Your baby." "There wasn't," Silas said, "a baby." French pulled his hand away in disgust. "Jesus Christ." "Roy?" Lolly said. Larry looking puzzled. "Larry." Silas made himself face him. "I'm the one owes you an apology. More than that. See, Cindy wasn't ever pregnant. She just said that 'cause she knew you'd bring her to see me. I didn't know that's what she was doing then. We were in love, or thought we were." Larry saying nothing, his open face. "That night," Silas went on, "after you dropped her off, we drove out to a field we used to go to, and we argued. She wanted to run away together, but how to say it? I had my baseball career ahead of me, and my mama was after me not to see her. It wouldn't have worked, for half a dozen reasons, so I just took her home." Larry said, "Took her home?" "Yeah." "You got there early?" "Yeah. She didn't wait on you 'cause she was mad at me. She just run off down the road, in the dark." "Where Cecil was?" "Yeah." They stared at one another, Silas aware of what Larry must be thinking, how Cecil would have stood up as she came in the door, her face red, tears streaking her cheeks, him holding his beer, stumbling forward toward her, yelling. Outside, Silas driving away in his mother's car, faster and faster, Larry heading there at the same moment, the two boys missing each other by a few minutes. Maybe their cars even met on the dark highway, lights on high beam, both too distracted to think of dimming, both flinching against the oncoming bright. "He killed her," Larry said. The doctor was back in the room, tapping his watch. "This interview," Lolly stepping between Silas and French, putting an avuncular arm over both their shoulders, "might need to be concluded, fellas. For now." "Wait," Larry said, as French began to fasten his restraints. "We were friends. Weren't we, Silas?" "Tell the fucking truth, 32. Silas." "You were Larry," he said. "I don't know what I was." Silas followed French and Lolly to the sheriff's department and parked next to French's Bronco. The chief got out and dropped a cigarette on the asphalt and ground it with his boot toe, looking up to where a reef of dark, swollen clouds, like a tidal wave, seemed ready to tumble over the building, wind on Silas's cheeks, the Mississippi flag snapping on its pole and the asphalt freckled with rain. Lolly hurried back to his reserved spot by the handicap space to roll up his windows, and then French held the door, and the three of them walked inside. Silas, like so many others summoned down to this red brick building to be questioned, interviewed. They stopped at the receptionist's desk, French and Lolly getting their messages, as Silas stood numbly behind. He followed them to French's box of an office, lined with filing cabinets. The CI tossed his recorder on the desk, with cardboard evidence boxes stacked beneath, and overhead, a bookshelf lined with videotapes and manuals and three-ring binders. To the left, a dry erase board on which his current cases were listed. Tina Rutherford first, Eminem second, a string of burglaries, a car theft, a rape, and at the bottom, Larry Ott's shooting. Silas sat in a folding chair, while Lolly closed the door and French clicked on his coffee maker. The sheriff stood with his arms on the top of a filing cabinet and took a can of Skoal from his pocket and fingered himself out a dip. French rolled his chair from under his desk and sat, the coffee starting to drip. "Okay," he said. "Talk." "That's a hell of a story," French said when he'd finished, telling everything but being Larry's half-brother. He'd poured a cup of coffee and handed it to Silas, then made another and given it to Lolly. "But you want a little advice? If I was you, I wouldn't go too public with it. You know what I mean? Back in 1982? Might have been a good time. Then they could have made Cecil Walker the suspect. Questioned him at least. But since he's been dead a while..." "Cancer," the sheriff said, "if it's any consolation. He had a tough go at the end." "And now," French went on, "here you've been carrying this information around with you for a quarter century. I understand your reasons, but considering they never found the Walker girl's body, and Art never did no time..." "Shit," Silas said. "Larry's done time his whole life." "Well, you're reaching into ethics here, I'd say, or civil law one, and both of them's a tad outside our jurisdiction, but considering he never went to prison, it might be best to let sleeping dogs lie. We'll focus on the current case. If he's innocent, it'll come out." "So none of what I've told y'all changes anything?" Silas asked. "About Tina Rutherford?" "Like what?" "Like whoever killed her's probably cashing in on Larry's reputation. If I'd killed her," Silas said, "guess where I'd bury her?" "We know where you would," French said. "But it wasn't a lot of folks aware of that little tomb, was it? And Art, before you busted in and started fucking everything up, he gave what I'd consider to be a preliminary confession. What about you, Sheriff?" "Sounded like one to me. Enough to keep him clipped to his bed. Keep Skip by the door." "But not you," French said to Silas. "I think you'll understand why, as of now, I'm taking you off guard duty." "Yeah," Silas said. At the hospital, his shoulders and hat wet from rain, he stopped and talked a moment with Skip, who got up from his chair by the door. "You early," he said. "You hear he confessed?" "Yeah." It was the day for it. "I ain't staying. Can you babysit him a minute? I need a smoke." "Go on." Silas watched him hurry down the hall, and when he was sure the man was gone and wasn't coming back, he slipped into the room. Larry lay with his eyes closed, turned toward the window, his bandaged chest rising and falling. Silas said, "Larry." He shifted, opened his eyes and peered up where Silas stood holding his hat. "Hey," Silas said. Larry lay watching him. Then he opened his lips and said something, his voice so quiet Silas came forward, leaned in. "Do what, Larry?" "All this time," he said. "She's been dead?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably." "And all this time, you've been the one that dropped her off?" "I'm sorry." "All this time, people thinking it was me." "Look," Silas said, "we can talk about that. We will. I got a lot to say to you. A hell of a lot. More than you know. But right now, it's real important that we get this mess with that dead girl cleared up, the Rutherford girl. They think you confessed to it, but we both know you didn't do it." "How you know I didn't do it, Silas?" "Same way I know you didn't shoot yourself." "How?" "'Cause you knew me for 3 months 25 years ago. What makes you think you know anything about me now?" "Just tell me who shot you. I got a good idea that that person may be the one that killed her." Outside, thunder. They returned toward the window. "You called me," Silas said, that note of pleading in his voice, "right before you got shot. You said it was important. What was it you wanted to say?" "You never called back." "I didn't get your message in time." "Those other times." "I'm sorry about that, but the thing," Larry said, "that I wanted to tell you that first time, when you didn't want to talk to me, was that I was sorry. About what I said when Daddy made us fight." "That's okay, Larry. It was a long time ago." "But now," Larry said, "I don't know what to think. Or even if I'm still sorry." "Fine," Silas said. "But do you know who it was that shot you? Why'd you call me?" 32? Skip from the door. "What you doing?" "Nothing," Silas said. He looked again at Larry, who turned back toward the window, shut his eyes. Silas waited a moment, then left the room and closed the door. "The chief just called," Skip said, a puzzled look. "You off nights?" "Guess so." "How come?" he asked. "What the hell?" Silas turned to go. "Long story," he said. He sat at a plastic table in a plastic chair in the back of the Chabot bus, tracing his fingers up and down his Budweiser bottle, wishing he had a glass. The mill crowd had gone home, loud, dirty, and he had the place to himself. He'd been wondering what you felt when you learned you'd been robbed of 25 years of your life. Larry like a convict exonerated by DNA evidence, and Silas, the real criminal, caught at last. It was 11 p.m. The rain had quit. The bartender, Chip, a white dude with a goatee, sat on a stool behind the counter, cutting limes into wedges and putting them in a bowl and fanning mosquitoes with his knife. He tended bar long enough to know when to let a man alone, bringing Silas a fresh beer when he needed and taking his empties and clinking them in the garbage can. Shannon, the police reporter, had called his cell phone again, but he didn't want to talk to her. Out the row of windows in front of him were more tables and chairs, and, beyond, the gully overflowing with kudzu, trash caught in it like bugs in a spider web. Silas remembered riding the school bus as a boy, after they left the cabin on the outland and moved to Folsom, how the landscape blurred beyond the windows as you rode, him on his way to school, baseball, his future. Maybe, before his recruitment to bar service, he'd ridden this very bus. Now look out. Nothing but a gully full of weeds and garbage. Everything frozen. Was that what childhood was? Things rushing by out a window, the trees connected by motion, going too fast for him to notice consequences? If so, what was adulthood? The bus stopping? A man in his 40s, slammed with his past, the kudzu moving faster than he was? "Hey, cop! Where's your hat?" He looked up, ready to grumble he wanted to drink alone, but it was Irina, from White Trash Ave, standing with her hip cocked and a little snarly smile, her pale skin glistening from rain. "Any more snakes in your box?" he asked her. "I've been scared to open it. And them boys has got it staked out, hoping whoever it was will try again." She'd streaked red into her blonde hair. She wore a short denim skirt and red cowboy boots, wet too, a low-cut tank top that showed her tattoo. Was it a pot leaf? He was wary of looking too hard. She had a lot of plastic bracelets jangling on her wrist and a cigarette in her hand and red nail polish. "Had to carry my damn phone bill down to Bell South to pay it. Can I join you?" He nodded to the empty chair next to him. "Hey, Chip," she said. Budweiser. You ready, 32? I'm sure, both on my tab. Silas pushed the chair out with his boot, and she eased into it, a snake crawling in his own mailbox now, if Angie happened in. He'd half expected to find her here. They hadn't talked since the night before, his interpreting her not calling as a point she was making. I'm disappointed in you. Well, who wasn't? Irina leaned forward to look into his eyes, the low neck of her shirt inviting, the cups of a lacy black bra showing its tiny straps. You okay, officer? Chip's arms appeared between them, 2 bottles. Enjoy. Cheers, she said, touching the neck of her bottle to Silas's. He cheered her back, and they sipped together, her putting a cigarette out in the ashtray. What you doing? She asked. Getting drunk? Getting? I better catch up then. She ordered a shot of tequila, no salt, and when it came, she downed it and set the glass on the table. That's better, she said, her eyes watering. I was on my way to a party when I saw your little Jeep outside. It's hard to miss. It's cute. Hey, she said, pushing at his arm with her knuckles, her bracelets rattling. I got a tip for you. I'm off duty, he said, but go ahead. I can always use me a good tip. Irina took another slug from her bottle and sank even lower on the table, her breasts resting on it. Evelyn? She's my other roommate. She was at work when you came over, so you didn't meet her. But we got to talking the other night, the snake and all, and she gets all apologetic, something she hasn't told us, how she used to go out with this weird guy before she moved in with us. So one night, Ev goes over to his house, and they're partying, and this guy has all these guns. Pistols, a rifle in the corner. That's your tip? Guns? Oh, hell no. Ev's fine with guns. She loves to shoot. But the other thing is, he also has all these live snakes. In aquariums, on shelves, the kitchen table, right in his living room. He told her he collected them. Silas watched her as she talked. Her pupils were dilated. Weed. Maybe pills. So they start fooling around, and she says it's weird, necking, with snakes watching, how they don't blink. So by then it's getting too heavy. She tries to stop, but he won't. It starts getting ugly. She's really scared. Now, Evelyn's second husband, he gave her this little pistol, a single shot. For her purse, she manages to get it out and threatens to shoot this guy if he doesn't let her go. She said for the longest time he just looks at her. This weird smile, easing his hand toward one of the pistols on his table, like daring her to shoot. And she thinks, God, she might really have to nail this son of a bitch. But finally he just calls her a cunt and tells her to get the fuck out. She make a complaint? Not really. Evelyn's not, the complaining type. Some part Irina wasn't telling him. Drugs, probably. Maybe this Evelyn had thought he'd flip on her if she reported him. Irina tapped a cigarette from her pack, and he took her lighter and lit it. She just barely got out of there. Had to call somebody on her cell phone, come pick her up. So this guy, you think he mailed the snake? Maybe. She admitted she left her other place 'cause of him. He kept riding by, calling. What's his name? Wallace. Wallace Stringfellow. Lives over on past the Catfish Farm. He felt his pocket for a pen and scribbled the name on a napkin, stuffed it in his jeans pocket. It rang a dim bell. That guy on the four-wheeler. With the pillowcase. Wasn't that his name? Didn't Larry once say a good way to carry snakes was in a pillowcase? You best get home, he said, to your party. You ain't gonna be fit to drive, you keep drinking. You wanna come? Me? The Chabot constable? You sure you want me there? I can have a dampening effect for certain kinds of partying. She was sipping her beer, using her tongue on the lip of the bottle. I see your point. Instead, after a few more beers, more shots of tequila, they took his Jeep to her house. She had the place alone. Marsh and her baby gone to her mother's for the week, Evelyn at the party. The roads were slick with rain, and he drove carefully. She said it was cool riding drunk with a cop. You didn't have to worry about a DUI. In her yard, they waded through the muddy dogs, and he put his hand on the wall beside her door for balance as she felt under the mat for her keys. Inside, she clicked on the light, and a room appeared, and he made his way to the sofa while she went to get more beers. Place was clean enough. Baby toys around, a lava lamp churling on the end table, drapes open to the night. He put his fingers to his head to stop it spinning, thinking, "What are you doing, 32 Jones? You got to get out of here." She came back with 2 Bud Lights and sat beside him, handed him a bottle, put hers on the coffee table and her feet in his lap. "Remove these, officer," she said. Her boots. He got up and worked the first one off slowly and pulled at her little sock, her toes wiggling to help, her toenails red when the sock slipped free, her foot a good kind of musky. He let his gaze drift up her legs, past her knees, to where he saw red panties under her skirt. Another tattoo? An apple with a bite out of it, high on her inner thigh. She was watching him with a sleepy smile. He started to work the second boot off and lost his balance, his momentum taking him to the door where he caught its handle. She giggled and shook her foot at him. "Get back over here." He held the doorknob, looked out the window where a car passed slowly, its lights on dim. He thought how he was leaving fingerprints on the knob, on the beer bottle too, her cowboy boots, plus a witness just now out of sight, around the curve in the dark. He thought of Larry, in his bed, thought of Angie and hers. What the hell was he doing? "I got to go," he said. Chapter 13. Larry was flicking through channels on cable television, thinking of his mailbox. Over the years, he'd repaired it 6 times, mornings as he left for work, discovering it by the highway, askew on its post, or the whole thing knocked down and splayed in the mud, sometimes magazines fluttering over the road like chickens on the loose. Once the box and post missing altogether. He knew about this. How teenagers rode along, hanging out car windows with baseball bats. Knowing it happened to others should have been a comfort, but as he'd driven on to his shop those days, he'd noticed other mailboxes still standing, and known that he alone had been targeted. He was tired. Even though all he'd been doing was sleeping, he'd never been so tired. He was tired of buying mailboxes. He was sitting up, holding the remote control, the lights of his room dim. Outside, tall black clouds had so walled out the sky that night had come early, but now that the lightning had been unleashed, so much, so often, the world seemed weirdly strobe-lit, at odds with itself, day and night battling for dominion like God and the devil. His television remained clear through it all, unlike his set at home, where bad weather fuzzed the picture. He stopped on a Christopher Lee Dracula film from the early 1970s. By his count, he had 66 channels. This was cable, not DirecTV. DirecTV had even more channels. Wallace had said that. Wallace. He was tired of having only 3 channels. He aimed the remote up and switched to a talk show, then Bonanza, then news, a sitcom he didn't know, an old Jerry Lewis film. He thought of Silas again and felt his ears heat and something unfamiliar baking in his chest. He thought of Cindy. He changed the channel to where a man and a woman were selling jewelry, people out there buying it, calling on the phone. His chest hurt when he remembered Silas's face as a boy, Cindy's as a girl. The television flashed a man standing at an easel, giving an art lesson. Larry closed his eyes, and it was summer, 1979, the morning he'd brought paper and colored pencils to the woods along with his rifle. He and Silas spread the supplies out over a patch of bare ground and lay side by side and began to draw comic books. Larry's about one of his stock superheroes, a standard plot. More interesting, Larry stealing looks, were Silas's pages. His characters were strangely drawn, out of proportion, but interesting, elongated heads and large hands and feet. No background to any scene, just panels with people in them. He was doing a Frankenstein-like comic, a mad scientist bringing a corpse to life and Larry noticed in a dialogue caption that his assistant's name was Ergo. Larry said it to himself. He liked it for a name. He pushed his paper aside and rolled over, flexing his hand. Silas stayed working. "Hey," Larry had said, "how you pronounce that guy's name?" Pointing with his red pencil to Ergo. "Igor," Silas had said. Larry opened his eyes, worried his heart might push through the staples, keeping his flesh shut. The sky cracked outside. How long he'd waited on his porch, in his living room with its 3 channels, its puttering fire. How long he waited in his shop, in his father's old office chair, rereading the same books. How he'd driven from one spot to the other in his father's truck. This, his life, waiting for Silas and Cindy to return. While Silas roamed the world in his cleats. And Cindy, probably buried somewhere only Cecil knew. He changed channels. People singing. Soap operas. More news. Commercials. Baseball highlights. He saw Silas on the infield. Cocky, acrobatic, firing a white blur to first, frozen over second base, caught in the act of throwing. He saw himself before his date with Cindy. Remembered his smile in the bathroom mirror. His father's story about Cecil falling off the rope, the 3 of them laughing, their last good night. His window flickered. He saw himself the day of their date, talking to Cindy in the smoking area. Silas watching them from the field. Saw Silas and his friends at the haunted house. Saw Cindy there. They'd been together, then, but nobody knew. And neither offered him as much as a glance, turning their backs on him as he left with his mask. The mask. Wallace. He clicked the remote. His wrist sore. Cartoons. Not Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck, but some new Japanese-looking thing. Something he'd missed. Something else he'd missed. Click. Another Western. Click. News. Iraq. Commercials. Click. A show about a serial killer, and the serial killer who imitated him. The remote sweaty in his hands. Weather. Tennis. Men. Women, children, dogs, airplanes, the president waving, a televangelist asking for money with his eyes tight in prayer. Click. A king cobra rising with its hood fanned and the camera panning to show its eyeglass design. So many channels. He pressed the button again. Close-up of a mosquito. Among the hairs of an arm. Its needle sunk in the rippling skin. On local Channel 5, he paused on a familiar scene. This hospital. An angle from the parking lot. Daylight. Then his own face, at 16. His 11th grade yearbook photo. He pressed a button on the remote, and a reporter was saying, recovering from a possibly self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest in Folsom General Hospital. The scene changed to a grainy shot of ambulance drivers hurrying a body bag over a parking lot, flashing police lights, and then a picture of a lovely, smiling girl. Odd as a suspect in the abduction, rape, and brutal murder of 19-year-old University of Mississippi junior Tina Rutherford, whose body was discovered buried beneath an abandoned building on Ott's property in rural Gerald County, Mississippi. Police investigators won't comment on the story, but a deputy is presently stationed outside Ott's hospital room. Larry sat breathing, his chest sore. The rain fell harder, and the window had gone very dark until lightning lit the streaking panes. He looked to the door. "Excuse me," he called to the deputy outside. He had to call 4 times before the man, he'd read Skip Holiday on his name tag, got up and peered in, a frown. "Yeah." "Can I talk to Roy French, please?" The deputy regarded him. "You change your mind?" "Tell him," Larry said, "that I remembered something." "Well, he's gone. Won't be back till tomorrow. Is there somebody else you want to talk to? Sheriff?" "No." "I'll wait for French." The deputy nodded and left. Larry was going to tell what he knew. Until today, he'd have preferred Silas. But now he would tell French how, a few nights after the Rutherford girl had vanished, he opened his eyes and sat up in bed, awake for no reason. He reached for his clock and held it out to see the time. 3:15 a.m. Risen from bed in his pajamas, he'd gone down the hall, closing his robe, standing in his living room. For a moment he considered his pistol, but then he unlocked his front door and went out without it. Wallace was sitting on his steps, smoking, his back to Larry, head down, looking very small in the dark. The moon was low, but still cast Larry's truck shadow in its light, and, beside it, a sedan parked in the yard. "Wallace?" "Hey," he said, not turning. "You drunk?" "Yeah." "It's the middle of the night." "I done something." "What?" He didn't say, just inhaled, exhaled his smoke. "How long you been out here?" "I don't know." "Where you been all this time?" He didn't answer. Larry went to his chair and eased himself down, sat leaning forward with his hands folded on his knees, his bare feet on the porch floor. "Is something wrong, Wallace?" "What'd you do?" He didn't answer. "How's John Wayne Gacy?" "Mean as ever. I moved out of my mama's house 'cause she's scared of him. That direct TV bastard's shacking up with her now. I rented me a place up near the catfish farm. Ain't got no neighbors but catfish. They got a fella rides four-wheeler between the ponds, but sometimes I can sneak up in there and fish." "Like you used to fish in my creek?" "Yeah, but now I catch one once in a while. Some big old some bitches in there." "They'll let you fish on that place, you know," Larry said, "if you'll just pay a fee. Got a special pond, I heard. People take their young'uns. Cost by the pound, I think." "You know me, Larry. I'm an outlaw. Can't do illegal or it's no fun." "You get a new car?" "Yeah. Don't run worth a shit, though." "I had an idea," Larry said. "You did?" "Yeah. Would you like to learn to fix cars?" "What you mean?" "I mean, would you like to come work at my shop?" Wallace quiet. "You could be my apprentice." "I don't believe it would work out, Larry." "How come?" "'Cause I ain't worth a shit." "Why you say that, Wallace?" "If I could learn, anybody can. My daddy, he used to say I was mechanically disinclined. But then in the Army they taught me, and I found out I was pretty good at it. Just needed a chance." Wallace ground his cigarette out on the step. "Anybody else been bothering you?" "Not for a while." "Not since me, huh?" "You never bothered me, Wallace." They sat a while. "You can think about it," Larry said. "The apprenticeship." The visit hadn't lasted much longer, and Wallace never said what he'd done. But after Larry watched him go, he spent the rest of the night on his porch as daylight crept through the trees like an army of crafty boys. When French got to the hospital, Larry decided he would talk. Tell what he'd remembered. Tell how, at first, he'd felt a kind of protection for the man who'd shot him, who'd been his friend. But he thought Silas had been his friend too, hadn't he? Maybe Larry was wrong about the word friend. Maybe he'd been shoved away from everybody for so long, all he was a sponge for the wrongs other people did. Maybe, after all this time, he started to believe their version of him. But no more. This fella, he'd tell French, saw him at church once. He used to come around when he was a boy. Larry saw a little of himself in him, maybe. This strange, lonely kid. Maybe, to this kid, in this world Larry hadn't caught up to, Larry was even a kind of hero. But watching its images, he was catching up to what the world had become. No more the world of green leaves where his father had carried a shotgun to school, left it in the corner by the wood stove, walking home, shooting squirrels for dinner. Summers Carl Ott had gone shirtless and grown dark brown from the sun and found ticks in his hair and chiggers fattening with his blood. Now the land had been clear-cut. Mosquitoes infected you with West Nile, and ticks gave you Lyme disease. The sun burned its cancer into your skin, and if you brought a gun to school, it was to murder your classmates. "I've been lying here a long time," Larry would tell French. "I got a good idea who shot me, and who killed the Rutherford girl. He drinks Pabst beer," Larry would say. "Rides a four-wheeler. He buys marijuana from a black man named Morden Morissette, nicknamed Eminem. He has a mean dog named John Wayne Gacy. He gave me the pistol he shot me with. He said girls wanted to be raped. They liked it. He came to my house and said he'd done something. I saw his eyes in the mask he wore. My mask. And it was only 4 people alive who knew about that cabin where that Rutherford girl was buried. Me, my mother, who can't remember anything, Silas Jones, and Wallace Stringfellow." Barry unmuted the television, changed channels, tried not to think of Wallace anymore, or of Silas, or of Cindy. When he did, his chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with the bullet they cut out, nothing to do with the scars raked over his heart, that sad little muscle. Somewhere he'd read the solution to people slamming mailboxes with baseball bats. What you did, you bought a pair of mailboxes, a small one and a much larger one, big enough for the first to fit in 2, like a package. You put the smaller one into the larger and poured concrete in around it, embedding it. When it dried, you cemented the whole heavy thing into the ground on a metal post. So the next time a car roared along, punk out the window, baseball bat cocked back, let him take his swing. Let him break his arm. Click. A show about polar bears. Click. When he got home, he would cement his mailbox. A dog food commercial. He'd get a dog when he got home. Click. Another preacher, fine-looking suit, the man crossing a podium decorated with lilies, preaching mutely, his Bible in the air. Click.